Imagine coming to the realization that the key to successfully managing a flourishing business did not lie solely in the financial figures or the profits, but rather in the manner in which you treat your employees. This is precisely the discovery that Thomas Miller made, and it transformed everything. It was just another afternoon, a typical day in a suburban supermarket located in Los Angeles, California. The fluorescent lights hummed gently above, casting their sterile illumination over rows of meticulously organized shelves. A symphony of shopping carts, clicking heels, and distant conversations filled the atmosphere. Thomas Miller, the proprietor of a rapidly expanding chain of supermarkets, chose to enter quietly, just like any other shopper. The store bustled with activity, nothing out of the ordinary. However, for Thomas, it represented a rare chance to observe how his business truly operated and how his employees interacted with the customers who walked through the doors each day. He had participated in the usual management meetings and reviewed boardroom reports, but this experience promised to be different. This would be authentic. Dressed in a simple, unpretentious polo shirt and jeans, Thomas seamlessly blended into the crowd. His brown hair was slightly tousled, and his glasses sat comfortably on the bridge of his nose. To the staff, he was merely another face in the crowd, which was exactly what he desired. This anonymity would allow him to observe without the polite facade that people often put on when they knew the boss was watching. He strolled through the aisles, the steady rhythm of his footsteps synchronizing with the shoppers around him. The produce section, the dairy aisle, the shelves filled with canned goods, all seemed perfectly in order. The store was clean and well organized, yet as Thomas walked, he couldn't shake off the feeling that something fundamental was lacking. The employees, though courteous, appeared to be merely going through the motions. There was an absence of spark and warmth, a smile here and there, but nothing that conveyed genuine care for customers. He observed as a cashier greeted a customer with a forced smile, barely making eye contact, quickly scanning the items while saying little more than, "Hi, how are you?" And that'll be $42.50. The interaction was transactional, efficient, yes, but devoid of personal touch. As Thomas continued to watch, he pondered whether this was a standard across his stores. Were his employees simply adhering to a script? Had he inadvertently cultivated this culture? As he approached the checkout lanes, he noted the staff behind the counters. A young man, likely in his early 20s, was scanning groceries with robotic precision, his eyes rarely lifting from the register as the line grew longer. A few feet away, an older woman in her 50s appeared more interested in conversing with a colleague than in engaging with the next customer. Thomas frowned slightly, making a mental note of this observation. However, he soon noticed Jasmine Carter, stationed at the end of one of the lanes. In her mid-20s, she had a kind expression that softened her sharp features. As he watched, she interacted with the customers ahead of him, genuinely listening, maintaining eye contact, and even sharing a joke or two. For Jasmine, it wasn't merely about the job. There was something more, a warmth and humanity that seemed absent elsewhere. Thomas edged closer, still trying to remain inconspicuous. He had no clear idea of what he was searching for, perhaps just a sense of curiosity or a desire to confirm his suspicions. The line was moving slower than he had anticipated, with a few impatient customers tapping their feet behind him. Yet Jasmine never faltered. Each interaction, no matter how routine, was met with her full attention. She inquired about how the day had been, noticed when someone appeared upset, and even went the extra mile to assist an elderly woman with her groceries without being prompted. It wasn't extraordinary, but it was rare, and to Thomas, it stood out in an unexpected way. As he stepped forward to her register, he couldn't help but admire her approach. She didn't just work there. She embodied the essence of service. When it was his turn, the line behind him continued to grow, but Jasmine's focus remained entirely on him as she began ringing up his items. The usual pleasantries commenced. "Hello. How's your day going?" she asked, her genuine smile brightening the interaction. For the first time that afternoon, Thomas found himself smiling back. Yet, there was something deeper, something that prompted him to reflect. Would she have approached things differently than the others? Was it genuinely just about the job for Jasmine? The line behind Thomas continued to grow longer as more customers joined, pushing carts filled with groceries, each one becoming increasingly impatient. He felt the subtle tension in the air, people huffing, shifting their weight from foot to foot, glancing at their watches, all waiting for the line to progress more swiftly. But even amid this pressure, Jasmine remained calm, almost serene, as she methodically scanned the items before her, never rushing, never faltering. Her pace was steady, each beep of the scanner serving as a soft reassurance that she was in control. Thomas stood there for a moment, absorbing the scene. He couldn't help but notice how distinct her demeanor was compared to the others. The other cashiers seemed to operate mechanically, as if ticking off a list. There was no personal connection, no effort to make the customer feel acknowledged or valued. One woman was chatting aimlessly with her colleague, barely recognizing the elderly woman at her counter as she hastily bagged her groceries. Another cashier barely glanced up from the register, muttering a quick hi, as a young father with a toddler hurried through. It was efficient, but it lacked authenticity. It wasn't personal. Jasmine, however, seemed to grasp that the transaction was not merely about exchanging money for goods. It was about people. A small gesture, a few kind words, and an acknowledgement of someone's presence could make a significant difference in the world. The customers ahead of Thomas appeared to recognize this as well. They smiled at her, engaged in light conversation, and even shared a few laughs. Jasmine was making a difference in her own subtle way. Still, Thomas couldn't help but wonder why no one else seemed to notice this. Were the other cashiers simply indifferent, or had no one shown them how to genuinely connect with customers? Were they, like the others he had observed earlier, merely going through the motions and ticking off boxes on some invisible checklist? He leaned back, his mind swirling with questions. What was missing here? Why did it seem so apparent with Jasmine, but invisible to the others? As he stood there, lost in thought, a sudden movement caught his attention. A customer in front of him, a man with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap, appeared to be growing increasingly agitated. He tapped his fingers on the counter, muttering under his breath and casting impatient glances at Jasmine as she carefully bagged his groceries. His irritation was palpable, his body language tense. Thomas observed the small signs of frustration, the clenched jaw, the tightening fists. Jasmine noticed as well. She didn't flinch or rush. Instead, she took a deep breath and smiled gently at him. "Looks like you're in a bit of a hurry," she said, her voice soft yet confident. "Is there anything I can do to help speed things along?" The man paused, his eyes narrowing, and for a moment Thomas feared he might snap at her. But then something unexpected occurred. The man let out a small laugh, almost embarrassed by his own impatience. "Yeah, sorry," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just have a lot on my plate today." Jasmine nodded sympathetically. "I understand. It's one of those days, huh?" She didn't press for details, but her words had a calming effect. The man's posture relaxed, and he let out a sigh, clearly relieved. Jasmine finished scanning his items, handed him the bag with a smile, and wished him a good day. It wasn't much, but it was sufficient to change the mood of the entire interaction. The man left the counter with a lighter step, his frustration dissipated, if only for a brief moment. Thomas watched all this unfold, his thoughts racing. What was it about Jasmine that set her apart? Was it merely her demeanor, or was there something deeper? He recalled his earlier observations of the other cashiers, the mechanical motions, the absence of personal connection. It became clear to him that Jasmine was not just performing a job. She was engaging with people in a way that the others were not. Her kindness was not an act. It was genuine. It wasn't forced, nor was it a part of some corporate policy or training manual. It emanated from within. But would this be enough to alter the course of Thomas's day, or was he simply overanalyzing the situation? As Thomas's turn approached, his mind remained a whirlwind of thoughts regarding the other cashiers. Why did they appear so detached, so distant? Was it burnout, or was there something more profound at play? Jasmine, on the other hand, had infused the counter with a warmth that felt entirely authentic. In that moment, he experienced a pang of realization. He had spent so many years focused on profit margins, growth, and expansion that he had completely overlooked what truly mattered. "Good afternoon." Jasmine greeted him brightly, her smile unwavering as she scanned the first item. Her voice was warm, devoid of the monotony he had encountered with the others. For a fleeting moment, Thomas almost forgot he was just another customer in line. He felt like a man conversing with someone who genuinely cared. He returned her smile, suddenly self-conscious. "Hello," he replied, his voice sounding almost awkward in comparison. He shuffled his feet for a moment, unsure of how to engage. Jasmine's eyes met his, and she raised her eyebrows playfully, clearly sensing his discomfort. "How's your day going?" she asked casually, maintaining eye contact as she rang up his items. Her tone was light, almost as if they were old friends. Thomas wasn't sure why, but it felt comforting. "It's going well, thanks." "How about yours?" he responded, realizing only then that he hadn't given much thought to his day until that moment. Perhaps it wasn't just about the supermarket or the transactions. Maybe it was about connecting with people. Jasmine's hands moved swiftly over the items, packing the groceries with careful attention. "Busy, like usual, but I like it that way," she said, giving him a glance that seemed to invite him to share in her sentiment. "You know how it is. People need their essentials." "Yeah, I suppose so," Thomas replied, his voice now more relaxed as he observed her work. There was an ease about her, an authenticity that made it challenging to maintain his usual business mindset. Jasmine was simply real. Yet, even as they exchanged small talk, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Why had he never noticed this aspect of his employees before? He had been so engrossed in logistics, numbers, and the bottom line. How had he overlooked the essential humanity that lay behind his company? He reflected on the corporate meetings, the reports, and the quarterly earnings. None of that had prepared him for this simple yet profound moment. As Jasmine finished ringing up his last item, Thomas quickly realized how much time had elapsed. He hadn't even noticed the line behind him growing longer as she bagged his groceries. He hesitated, feeling a growing urge within him to ask more, something deep in the usual customer interaction. But how could he phrase it? "Are you always like this?" he asked suddenly, before he could stop himself. He realized that he sounded peculiar, too inquisitive, too enthusiastic, but the question lingered in the air between them, and Jasmine didn't appear to be thrown off at all. She looked up at him, her expression gentle yet contemplative, as if she were considering the significance of his inquiry. "Like what?" he prompted. "Like caring about your customers. It's different from how the others do it," he stated before quickly realizing how odd that may have sounded. He swiftly added, "I mean, it's a positive thing that you're genuinely engaged, not merely going through the motions." Jasmine's smile broadened, a spark of understanding flickering across her face. She didn't seem offended. Rather, she appeared intrigued. "I guess I've always believed it's about more than just ringing people up. It's about ensuring they feel acknowledged, you know? You'd be surprised at how much people desire to be noticed. Life gets hectic, and sometimes this is the only place they get to interact with someone." Thomas blinked, absorbing her words. A part of him had always understood that business wasn't merely about transactions, but it had been easy to forget. He had become too engrossed in growth, efficiency, and maximizing profit margins to consider the importance of a personal touch. Jasmine, however, seemed to have discovered something he had lost, the heart of the business. She continued bagging his groceries with meticulous care, but her gaze remained fixed on him. "I don't know," she continued. "I just enjoy making someone's day a bit brighter, even if it's just for a few minutes." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat, unsure why her words resonated so profoundly. Perhaps it was the sincerity in her voice, or maybe it was because, for the first time in a long while, he recognized how much people like Jasmine represented the true foundation of any business, not the products, the stock, or the profits. For a moment he was silent, his mind racing as he processed everything she had shared. It was simple, almost too simple, but there was an undeniable truth in her words that had eluded him for far too long. As the conversation evolved, Thomas faced a choice. Would he leave it at that, or would he delve deeper? The hum of the store continued around them as Jasmine completed bagging his groceries. The line behind him was still growing, but it felt as though the chaos of the surrounding scene had faded. All that mattered for those fleeting moments was this conversation. It was strange. Thomas hadn't intended to spend so much time here, yet now he found himself reluctant to leave. There was something about Jasmine's words, her approach to life and work, that was profoundly unsettling in a positive way. He glanced over his shoulder, feeling the pressure of the impatient customer behind him, but he couldn't resist. He needed to know more. He needed to understand how someone like Jasmine managed to balance the demands of her job while maintaining such a grounded personal connection with those around her. "Jasmine," he began, his voice quiet but earnest, "I have to ask, do you ever feel frustrated with how things are here?" He paused for a moment, carefully weighing his words. "With how the job treats you?" Her smile faltered for just a second. Jasmine didn't respond immediately, as if contemplating the question. Thomas sensed a shift. It wasn't a straightforward inquiry. It was something deeper. He wasn't just asking about the logistics of her job. He was probing into her purpose. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with sincerity, and sighed softly. "All the time, actually. But the way I see it, we can't change the entire system by ourselves, but we can alter how we show up. We can change how we treat people, even if it's just one person at a time. That's the only control I have, you know?" Her words struck him deeply. Thomas hadn't anticipated her response. He had expected frustration, perhaps even bitterness. Instead, Jasmine's reply was refreshing, honest, and real, not clouded by disillusionment. She had discovered a way to navigate a job that many would perceive as a dead end without allowing it to diminish her sense of self-worth. She wasn't merely performing the work. She was embodying a philosophy, a way of life. Thomas nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. The awkwardness of the moment felt as though it was gradually dissipating. What she had said resonated profoundly, prompting him to reflect on his own choices and priorities. Was he guilty of treating his employees as faceless numbers on a report? Had he lost touch with the individuals who made his company thrive? "I've been doing things wrong," Thomas muttered, more to himself than to Jasmine. He recognized that all his years in the business world had blinded him to the very essence that made a company successful. The people, the employees like Jasmine, who were the true driving force behind it all. Jasmine paused for a moment, as if contemplating his words. "I get it. It's not easy," she said softly. "But it's the little things that matter. You just have to find the right balance." Thomas looked at her, struck by how wise she was for someone so young. There was something raw and genuine in her voice that made him feel as though he had been wandering around with his eyes closed for far too long. "You know," he said, leaning in slightly, "I'm actually the owner of this store." Jasmine blinked, clearly taken aback. She seemed to require a moment to process what he had just said, and then the realization hit her. The warmth in her eyes flickered, and she quickly straightened her posture, a brief flash of uncertainty crossing her face. You're the owner?" she asked, her voice a mixture of shock and curiosity. Thomas nodded. "Yeah, I'm Thomas Miller. I came in today to observe how my employees were doing. I didn't expect to witness all this." He gestured around the store, though it wasn't the physical space he was referring to. It was the spirit, the energy, the human connection. He had been too focused on the wrong things for far too long. Jasmine seemed to relax, and the smile that had momentarily faltered returned. "Well, I'm glad you saw something positive. I guess I wasn't sure what to expect either," she said with a small laugh. "But it's nice to know that someone notices." Thomas's heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and realization. "I've been running this business all wrong. I've been preoccupied with numbers, margins, and deadlines. I've been focusing on all the wrong aspects, and I forgot what truly makes this work. People like you." Jasmine looked down for a moment, and when she met his gaze again, there was a quiet pride in her eyes. "It's not just me," she said softly. "There are many people out there who simply want to be seen and heard. It's about recognizing that it's the people who matter." Thomas took a deep breath, a sense of clarity washing over him. He knew that this moment was just the beginning. The question now was, what would he do with this newfound understanding? As the conversation between Thomas and Jasmine continued, a weight seemed to settle on Thomas's shoulders. It was as if the entire discussion had been a mirror, reflecting everything he had been neglecting in his business, everything he had been taking for granted. He glanced around the store once more, noting the mechanical movements of the other employees, the indifference with which they approached their jobs. It wasn't that they were bad people, far from it, but something was missing. There was no heart behind the work, no real connection to the customers, no passion. And he admitted Jasmine, in contrast, stood as a beacon of what could be. She hadn't been doing anything revolutionary. There were no grand gestures or huge changes to how things were done. It was her approach, her attitude, her ability to see people as more than transactions that made all the difference. She hadn't waited for permission to change the way she interacted with customers. She simply did it, and it had an undeniable effect. Thomas leaned against the counter, his thoughts swirling in every direction. How many of his employees were like Jasmine, but too afraid to show it? How many had he overlooked simply because they didn't fit the corporate mold he had established? How many had been disheartened by the relentless focus on profits, efficiency, and targets? His heart felt heavy as he contemplated all the missed opportunities to cultivate a culture of care within his company. "I've been so focused on the numbers," Thomas said softly, almost to himself. "The quarterly reports, the metrics. I've lost sight of the people behind it all." Jasmine looked up at him, her expression kind but understanding. "It happens," she said simply. "It's easy to forget, but it's never too late to change." Thomas's eyes met hers, and in that moment, he realized that the shift in perspective didn't have to stem from a massive corporate overhaul. It could commence with something much simpler, something that didn't require a substantial budget or months of restructuring. It could begin with change in attitude, a change in how he approaches employees, how he valued them. He straightened up, a decision starting to form in his mind. He could transform the culture of his company. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. All it would take was time, patience, and a willingness to listen. He had been neglecting his employees for far too long, assuming they were merely cogs in the machine. But they were more than that. They were the heartbeat of the business. They were the ones interacting with customers every day, the ones who could make or break a customer's experience. "What if I told you that the store could be different?" Thomas asked, his voice gaining confidence. "What if I could ensure that every employee here feels valued, like they matter?" Jasmine's eyes softened, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "That would be amazing," she said simply. "But you can't just talk about it. You have to demonstrate it. People can sense when something's genuine." Thomas nodded slowly, his mind already racing with ideas. He could start small, focusing on one store at a time. He could implement a training program that prioritized customer connections over efficiency. He could encourage managers to get to know their employees, not just as workers, but as individuals with lives and stories. And he could foster an environment where kindness, empathy, and respect were the cornerstones of the business, not merely buzzwords on a poster. "I'll start with you," Thomas said, looking Jasmine in the eye. "I'll begin by recognizing how much you're doing, and then I'll ensure everyone else sees it too." Jasmine looked at him, clearly taken aback by the sincerity in his words. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, clearly moved. "You don't have to say anything," Thomas replied with a smile. "Just keep doing what you're doing." As he stood there, feeling the weight of his decision, Thomas realized that Jasmine had given him more than just insight into customer service. She had shown him how to be a better leader, how to connect with people on a human level, not just as a business owner or a boss. She had reminded him that success wasn't merely about profits. It was about relationships, about people, and about making each interaction count. But now, the real work was just beginning. Would Thomas follow through with the changes he had promised, or would his old habits pull him back? The days that followed that chance encounter at the supermarket were among the most transformative of Thomas's career. He couldn't stop reflecting on his conversation with Jasmine. Each time he entered his office, he felt a weight settle on his chest, a reminder of the commitments he had made to himself. Jasmine's words echoed in his mind. "It's about how you show up." It was simple yet profound. The work ahead wouldn't be easy. It would necessitate a shift in how he viewed his employees and his role as a leader. But it was a shift he was willing to undertake. Thomas didn't waste any time. He promptly called a series of meetings with his senior management team, explaining what he had witnessed in the supermarket. He spoke candidly, sharing his realization that the company had become overly focused on growth and efficiency, neglecting the human element, the one factor that truly drove customer loyalty. He told them about Jasmine, The cashier would illustrate the importance of making each customer feel valued. They listened intently, but Thomas could perceive the skepticism in their eyes. They were accustomed to concentrating on numbers, metrics, and immediate results. They didn't yet grasp the shift he aimed to implement, but Thomas was resolute. He knew that if he didn't act swiftly, his revelation would be nothing more than a fleeting thought. He needed to show them, not just tell them. Over the next few weeks, he began putting his ideas into action. He started by visiting stores in person, just as he had done that fateful afternoon. This time, he wasn't there to observe from the shadows. He was there to engage with the employees, to get to know them, to inquire about their experiences. Just like Jasmine had done, he treated them as people, not merely as workers. Initially, the employees were surprised. They had never seen Thomas so hands-on, so willing to spend time with them. They had always known him as the big boss who only appeared when there were problems to address. But this was different. This time, Thomas listened. He didn't just ask about sales and productivity. He asked about their lives, their challenges, and how they felt about their work. In return, they opened up to him in ways they never had before. It wasn't long before the change began to take root. Employees started to feel more seen, more heard. They began to take more pride in their work. Not because they were instructed to, but because they felt valued. The shift wasn't solely about customer service anymore. It was about creating a culture of respect and connection within the company. Thomas wasn't perfect, and the change didn't occur overnight. There were setbacks, moments when he had to remind himself of the bigger picture. But with each passing day, the company began to feel different. The employees, too, began to recognize the value in what they were doing. They understood that it wasn't just about selling products. It was about creating experiences, fostering relationships, and making customers feel acknowledged. It was about going beyond the transaction and connecting with people on a personal level. The most significant change occurred when Thomas returned to the store where it had all begun. His visit to Jasmine's checkout counter. This time, he didn't just come to observe. He came to express his gratitude. When Jasmine saw him walk through the door, her eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Miller, what are you doing here?" she asked, clearly not expecting him to return. "I'm here to thank you," Thomas said, smiling, "for reminding me what truly matters." Jasmine blinked, clearly unsure how to respond. I don't know what to say. I was just doing my job." "You were doing more than that," Thomas said with a soft chuckle. "You showed me something I had forgotten, that a business is built on people, not just customers, but employees. It's the small things, the kindness, the connection, that make all the difference." Jasmine smiled, her eyes bright with appreciation. "I'm just glad it made a difference," she said. Thomas nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle within him. The company was changing, but more importantly, he was changing. He had learned that true leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice in a room or making decisions from a distance. It was about showing up, being present, and valuing people for who they were, not just for what they could produce. As he left the store that day, Thomas felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He knew the work wasn't finished, but he also recognized that he was on the right path. The road ahead would present challenges, but he was no longer focused solely on the numbers. He was focused on the people, their stories, their needs, their humanity. And for the first time in a long while, Thomas Miller felt genuinely fulfilled in his role as a leader. As he continued his journey, Thomas understood that leadership wasn't a destination. It was a continuous process of learning, growing, and adapting. The real question was, what kind of leader would he choose to be? Every day, as time progressed, Thomas Miller's transformation reverberated throughout his company. From the manner in which he engaged with his employees, the way they interacted with customers, the change was not instantaneous, but it was undeniably authentic. Thomas had transitioned from concentrating solely on profits and figures to recognizing that at the heart of every business, regardless of its size, were the individuals who made it all possible. He began making regular visits to stores, not merely as the owner, but as someone who genuinely cared about the people working there. With each visit, he observed a notable difference. The employees who once appeared detached and disengaged were now actively involved, eager to enhance the shopping experience for every customer who walked through the door. The customers themselves began to perceive this shift as well, a warmer ambience, increased attention, and an overall sense that they were valued as more than just a transaction. However, the true power of this transformation resided in the subtle moments, the small gestures that had previously been overlooked. The smiles exchanged, the brief bits of small talk, and the simple act of recognizing individuals for who they were. These were the elements that transformed an ordinary shopping trip into something truly memorable. And it all began with one conversation, one woman, Jasmine, who made the conscious choice to create a difference, no matter how insignificant it might have seemed at the time. She reminded Thomas of the profound impact of human connection. It was a straightforward truth, yet one that so many business owners and leaders tend to overlook. People matter. They always have, and they always will. It is through those connections, those moments of genuine interaction, that businesses truly flourish. So, as you witness this story unfold, take a moment to reflect on the instances in your own life where a simple act of kindness made a significant difference. Consider the individuals you encounter daily and how you can make them feel seen, heard, and appreciated. Whether it's offering a smile to a cashier, sharing a kind word with a colleague, or simply taking the time to listen, your actions have potential to alter the course of someone's day, and perhaps even their life. Each of us possesses a power to affect change. Sometimes, it merely requires a slight shift in perspective to recognize that the things that truly matter are not always the ones we prioritize. Thomas's journey serves as a poignant reminder that the human element is the essence of any business. Success is not solely measured by numerical figures. It is quantified by the relationships we cultivate, the lives we influence, and the kindness we extend. If you have found inspiration in this story, please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this video with someone who might benefit from hearing it. Take a moment today to make someone feel valued. And remember that even the smallest acts of kindness can leave a profound and lasting impact. When you show up with your whole heart, you never know who you might transform along the way.